Hey friends, it is episode 118 of the Diet Diaries. This is going to get published on Monday, March 6th. Today's Monday, February 27th, making sure my microphone is on. I usually record about a week in advance. I'm feeling really tired today. It's like 12 o'clock. I made all the notes I wanted to talk about for this episode, and I'm like scrolling Instagram and scrolling Facebook and getting sucked into like the most random of things, like not having like the, kind of the motivation to sit here and do this. But here I am because I actually had the idea for this podcast a couple of weeks ago, made a note about it and was super excited at the time and just sat through and was making all my notes and am really looking forward to talking about this today. But before I do that, what we're going to talk about is, and I talk about this all the time, but kind of, I don't know, I've never done a full podcast episode on it. So that's what today is. And it is about exactly how fat loss happens without dieting, right? I talk about this all the time as kind of like one of the really big benefits of the work that I do with people and of learning the skills that I'm always working to help teach you guys. But I want to really kind of break down how that actually can result in fat loss for some people. Before I do that, I wanted to talk about just for a moment or two, because it's been a while since I've mentioned it, the spring weekend retreat. So now it's March and the retreat is happening May 19th. So it's getting a little bit closer. Wanted to remind you that it's happening, maybe let you know for the first time if you haven't heard about it. I am hosting a 3-day, 2-night retreat in Hunter, New York, which is in the Catskill Mountains, about 2 hours from New York City, at a beautiful Airbnb in the mountains. It's going to be amazing. Everything, it's all inclusive, and it's going to be kind of like a series of mini workshops interspersed with yoga and downtime for yourself. And the workshops are going to be around nutrition, around body image, and around self-care. So that you're really walking away with very clear skills that you want to focus on moving forward. And we will get really specific about that. If you have been working on your relationship with food for a long time, this is for you. If you have never worked on your relationship with food, but you've been wanting to, this is for you. There's really no like, this is only for this specific subset of people. This is for people who are wanting to make a change or have started to make a change or made a change and are kind of like beyond that around food and are ready to kind of shift away from like the mainstream diet restriction, weight loss is the answer to all of my problems kind of life. And to really learn the skills about how to do that and how to make it sustainable, how to find self-worth that is not reliant just on what you look like, how to stop feeling stressed out by food, how to stop feeling like you're supposed to constantly be on a diet, how to stop being stuck in kind of this vicious cycle of either being on a diet or saying, fuck it, I can't do this diet anymore. And having downtime to yourself. And we're going to be mixing in a lot of movement because movement is a really essential way to start to reconnect with some of these parts of yourself that you're probably have drifted away from over time and maybe not even necessarily realized it. So it's $675. That's all inclusive for the weekend, including all food. Does not include transportation. But if you need help with that, I'm happy to talk it through with you. So I will leave a link in the show notes. All the information is on my website. And that's that. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. How does fat loss happen without dieting? So here's the thing. Fat loss happens through a caloric deficit. And a caloric deficit is just a fancy way of saying when you eat less calories than your body needs in a day to do everything that it needs to do. And when you do that consistently over time. But we've just been taught that there's only one way to do that. And that is a diet, right? Either through the rules of a diet or the numbers of a diet or both. That is how you reduce the number of calories. And as a byproduct, those rules and those numbers, get very restrictive because it may involve cutting out an entire food group. It may involve setting a specific like calorie or point limit that feels very restrictive or is really lower, much lower than it needs to be. Maybe there's rules around you can have this food, but you can't have that food. You can only eat between these hours. You have to eat every 2 to 3 hours to keep your metabolism fired up. So many things exist out there. Maybe you've done like a juice cleanse and only drank juice for 3 days to cut calories. Maybe you have done paleo and cut out like grains and dairy to cut calories. If you have lost weight before, it's because you ate less calories than your body needed. That's science. That is the law of thermodynamics. Okay, these are not things that are up for debate. So one way to think about it might be in that you've probably done many different diets. Some have probably which worked, which I use air quotes for that, worked meaning you probably got weight off. But again, if you've done multiple diets, it means that the weight obviously came back on and you tried again to lose weight. So there are obviously many different types of diets out there. And kind of the cliche thing is, well, which diet's the best one? Well, it's the one that you're going to stick to and the one that you're going to enjoy the most. But the reality is nobody really enjoys a diet because a diet inherently is restrictive. There's usually deprivation. It's very rigid. And when you go outside the walls and the parameters of that diet, then you're screwed. That's when things get really tricky. And that is why, one of the reasons why, I teach people a skills-based approach to eating. And what happens is when you start to use those skills, it starts to bring your food intake, how much you're eating, much more in line with what your body actually needs, and makes it much easier to get into essentially a caloric deficit. Most of us right now are eating more food than our bodies need. That is why most of us are carrying around extra body fat. And so again, the way we've been used to doing something about that is to saying, okay, well, I'm only eating 1,500 calories, or I'm not eating carbs, or I'm not eating desserts, or I'm not eating grains, whatever it is. And because it feels easy to set a rule, because it's finite, because then you set it, it's like set it and forget it. They don't have to think about it until you do have to think about it. And I've talked about that on other episodes, and I want to try and keep this focused today so it doesn't get super long. So what happens is when you use a skill instead of a rule, you are able to, it just feels better. You feel, honestly, ultimately, more in control. Like you get to make choices, like you get to decide, and like you get to actually enjoy the process. And that is what makes it last. Because I don't care if you can follow a diet and lose weight in 30 days or in 60 days or even 90 days. I care about if you can not follow rules, but use rules and lose weight and then keep it off for 3 years, for 5 years, for 6 years. Like the next 30 days literally means nothing in terms of results. Nothing. Just because you do something for the next 30 days does not mean it's going to be there for 30 days after that. In fact, for a lot of people, it's not. And so the skills obviously take a longer time to learn, to practice, and to get results from, but then they're with you for life. So skills are what ultimately change your behaviors and then your habits. And ultimately, for most of us, not everyone, I'm not speaking in total absolutes, because there are some people, if you have been under eating and you are underweight, meaning you do not have enough body fat on your body, then these skills can actually help you gain weight. And I've worked with clients on that too. These skills can work in any situation, for gain, for loss, for maintenance. So meaning these aren't just about fat loss. These are about changing your relationship with food. And then fat loss becomes a byproduct of that. Whereas with a diet, the fat loss is the goal and nothing about your relationship with food changes. And you know that because you do the diet and you're just as stressed out and obsessed and panicked and anxiety ridden around food as ever. Maybe even more so when the diet finishes, because now you're like, shit, and I don't have the rules. Now what do? I'm like, now I'm screwed. And that's why the weight comes back on. So the fat loss can become a byproduct of how you feel around food. So again, what these skills do is they bring your food intake in alignment with what your body actually needs. And they allow you to eat probably a little bit less than your body needs calorically, because mentally and emotionally and physically, you are able to feel satisfied and full with a little bit less food, We just eat more than we need to because that is our culture, that's our society, and that's the food we're surrounded with. A lot of hyper-palatable, highly processed foods that are amazing and taste delicious and are therefore very easy to overeat. We are served huge portions in restaurants. Our concepts of what portions are, of what our bodies need, are very, very skewed. We just don't know. Again, it's not because we're bad. It's not because we're not trying hard enough. We don't know. And a lot of environmental stuff, and by environmental stuff, I mean portions at restaurants. I mean the abundance and the constant presence of really highly processed foods makes it hard. It does. And this is not saying that highly processed foods are, quote, bad. Are they nutritious? No, they have other value. They taste awesome, and there is value in that. But we also have to be aware that they can sometimes make things harder. So I wanted to kind of actually get into a couple of examples of how this works. So I've done many episodes around the skills. So I'll quickly run through a handful of them. This is not really about the specific skills. I'm going to give a couple, maybe definitely 2, maybe 3 examples of how that skill then works to change the intake of your food. And then how that results in fat loss. So this kind of the core skills that I often talk about. The first one is the nourish, satisfy, satiate framework, right? Think of this Venn diagram. These 3 circles are overlapping, and you want 95% of your meals to be in the center of that, meaning your meals are nutritious, they are filling, and you enjoy them. That's like the foundation. As part of the nutritious part, the nourishing part, you want to be prioritizing protein and veggies and fiber at as many meals as possible. You want to be putting your fork down. You want to be slowing down while you're eating. And there's many ways to do that. I'm not really going to get into all the specifics around it. One way is to put your fork down between bites. You want to be slowing down. And I'm actually going to talk about an example in more detail around that. You want to be eating bigger meals and fewer snacks for most people. Again, not absolutes. For most people, bigger meals and fewer snacks. I'm going to talk in a more in-depth example about that too. You want to work on not labeling foods as good or bad and shifting that to nutritious foods and less or non-nutritious foods to start to strip away some of the emotion that we have around these foods, because that's what ultimately leads us into these binge and restrict cycles. Maybe you want to be tracking your food and not necessarily quantitatively tracking, meaning macros or calories, depends, but qualitative tracking. What time did I eat? Where did I eat? When did I eat? How did I feel? Getting some more data around the whole experience of eating, not just the numbers behind the food, and treating the food as a commodity. And again, that's for a period of time. And then one of the other big skills is putting your food on a plate, sitting down, having less distractions. Okay, so those are some of the key core skills I've talked about a lot on here. I talk a lot about on social media and emails. What I wanted to do was take a couple of those and give you some more in detailed kind of context or explanations. And the first one I'm going to talk about is around the meals versus snacks. And I have a client who lost 15 plus pounds just from doing this. And that's not me saying this as like a magic fix. I have other clients who have had a lot of success with this as well, but this was like the big change that we made over a period of time. So it's the meals versus snacks skill. All right. So think about this. Right now you're eating, let's say 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. You're eating 5 times a day. So pretty frequently, basically you end up eating every 2 to 3 hours, which is pretty frequent. And a snack is meant to be like a kind of well, in theory, it's meant to be a mini meal. We often tend to eat, that's when we tend to eat like more processed stuff, which is not filling and easier to overeat. So let's say it's like you've had breakfast at, let's say 7. Let's say it's, 10:30, or so you've had breakfast 7:30, whatever it is, 10:30, you're having a snack, you're hungry because you probably didn't have enough protein at your breakfast, right? So all these things are like interwoven. It's time for a snack, you're hungry, you have your snack, whatever it is. It's probably something a little more processed. And again, not all, first of all, most food is processed, but the more processed it gets, the easier it is to overeat, the less filling it tends to be, right? So then you have both of these things kind of working against you, making it much easier to eat more than you want to or need to. So you're hungry, you have your snack, but because it's a snack, and let's say in your head, because all of us are coming from the same background here, in your head, you're like, a snack is like 150, 200 calories, maybe 250. Eating 200 calories is not going to fill you. You're going to eat that snack. You're still going to be hungry afterwards. and you're going to be much more inclined to then want to eat something else. Maybe it's more of that same snack. Maybe it's you grab something else. So then before you know it, you've tacked on another 100, 150, another 200 calories onto your snack. And then you go and you have your lunch. And then the same thing happens in the afternoon, right? Your lunch probably doesn't have enough protein or veggies or fiber. So you have your lunch and you're probably like not as full as you maybe would want to be. And then so it's 4 o'clock comes around. And again, you're kind of hungry. You're looking for stuff. You're having some cravings. Same thing happens. You're like, okay, I'll go grab a snack. I'll grab a 200 calorie snack. And then you eat it. But because you're actually hungry and your lunch wasn't really that filling, you're going to be looking for more than that kind of portion. So what happens is you end up eating more overall. Partially, mainly because you are eating so often, you're not eating enough at meals. You're never kind of getting as full as you need to be. I'm going to use the word should. I'm going to say actually that as you want to be to last 4 to 6 hours. That's always the goal that we're starting to work on. And you end up eating more overall because a snack is never filling. So you eat the snack and then you need to eat a little bit more. And it might not seem like that much at the time, but 100 calories, 50 calories, 100 calories, that stuff adds up. And again, this is not about like nitpicking. This is about science. Like I've talked about this before. Like we all have, me too, a very hard relationship with calories, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. It doesn't mean that we can necessarily totally ignore that. We have to shift the way we think about and use that information. So what happens is if you take in conjunction with some of these other skills, but even if you just take some of the food that you have with that snack and you put it with your earlier meal, you will feel fuller longer and not need to eat that snack. You might then be able to go 4 to 5 hours. Let's say you have breakfast at 7:30 and you take that initial snack that you were planning to eat and you eat it, not the snack itself, but let's say you take like the allotment of that food. Hopefully this makes sense. Put it with breakfast. So you're eating a much bigger breakfast. You will stay fuller longer and be more likely to get to 12 o'clock, 12:15, 12:30, and then have lunch. So in your head, you're thinking, well, I'm just taking the calories of the snack and putting it with breakfast. How is that changing anything? Because remember, when you eat that snack, you're typically still hungry afterwards and you're grabbing for more food. You are grabbing things, a bite here, a thing there, a piece of candy from my coworker's dish, a couple of chips from the cabinet, some almonds here. You're doing it way more than you know. That cycles back to the skill around putting food on a plate and sitting down, right? These skills all like interweave with each other. But again, we're not trying to work on all of them at once. We're trying to start with 1 to 2. Pairing the snack skill with increasing protein is a really good place to start because the protein helps with fullness and putting the snack with the meal makes it bigger, which also helps with fullness. Over time, this might not show up in a week or 2 weeks, but within a few weeks of you snacking less and making your meals a little bit bigger, you will ultimately end up eating less overall. Not because you restricted, not because you said you couldn't have something, not because you had to like count the calories, but because when you have a bigger meal with protein in it, you will stay fuller longer. You won't need the snack. And snacking 90% of the time leads to overeating. One, because the nature of the snack that you're eating is not going to be filling. And 2, because snacks are inherently not filling. Even if they're nutritious, they're not filling. So then it's hard to feel hungry after you eat and say, okay, I'm going to stop eating. So I hope that this makes sense. You're basically kind of regrouping your foods, and in doing so, you will eat less overall, right? That's not a rule. That's not following numbers. This is simply thinking about how do I make my meals more robust so that I'm not getting hungry every 2 to 3 hours. You will end up eating less overall, which will bring you into a caloric deficit. And if you are right now in a place where you are actively gaining weight, this will bring you into a place where you stop gaining weight and you get into a maintenance place, right? Let's get there first. Let's get into a place where we're stopping the weight gain because of the extra eating and snacking. And let's get to a place where we're maintaining. And then we can start to refine these skills. That's when we start to layer on more skills. Okay, so that's one example. Okay, so the second skill I wanted to talk about, I'm going to keep these really kind of tangible today. I'm not going to dive into some of the more quote heady stuff around good, bad foods because it's a little bit harder to wrap your brain around. Super important, but not necessarily the first place that I would start. So let's kind of talk about slowing down slowing down and paying more attention. So this encapsulates a few skills. This could be putting your fork down. This could be using a timer. This could be making sure all the food you eat is on a plate. This could be sitting down at a table. Whatever applies to you most, whatever it is that you know you're not doing. A lot of us eat very fast and end up overeating or eating more than we need to as a result. You can kind of like think about in your head like, oh yeah, like that's kind of how this applies to me. So let's say that you're someone who eats pretty fast. Like you have a meal in front of you and you are done quickly. I have gotten better about this with work, but still am often, not with my family, but when I'm out with friends, very often the first person done eating. And for a long time, it was kind of embarrassing. I'd be done and everyone else had like half a plate of food and I'd basically sit there and be like, well, this is awkward. Like now what do I do? And a lot of times I'd still be hungry. Because what happens is you eat really fast. Yes, there is a connection, right? There is a delay. Whether or not it's actually 20 minutes, that number doesn't really have necessarily a ton of science behind it. But there is a delay and it's different for everyone. You might have a longer delay. Someone else might have a shorter delay. Like you kind of know how long it takes. 20 minutes, I think, is a little bit on the longer side. I think within 10 minutes, most people have a pretty good sense of like, I'm still hungry or I'm not still hungry. However, a minute or two, pretty much nobody does. You only know if you're full after a minute or two if you have like really kind of stuffed yourself and overeaten. So let's say you put a portion of food on your plate and you eat it and you're done. And you're like, oh, I'm still hungry. I want more. And you go up and you get more food and you eat it. And then you're like, oh, I'm really full now. I don't think I actually needed to eat that. You end up eating more food than you need to. And that probably happens pretty often, especially this going back to hyperpalatable foods, especially with the more processed stuff, because it's very easy to overeat and it's not filling. That is like a double whammy of anything, chips, crackers, some bread, cereal, stuff that you might think of as like, oh, that's like, pretty nutritious. It's not that it's not totally unnutritious, but it's lacking fiber, lacking protein. And again, it might be sweet or crunchy or have some fat in it or whatever it is that makes it kind of really appealing to you. And then it becomes easy to overeat. So not only is it not filling, it's easy to overeat. Double whammy, you're going to end up eating more than you need or want to. So by slowing down, again, whether you use the put the fork down between bites method, whether you use the timer method, whether you use putting all of my food on a plate method, whatever it is, right? Because think about how many bites you take off other people's plates, or if you're eating like a buffet style meal and you're standing at the kitchen counter and you're picking, or you're standing in front of the cabinet, there's all these situations. If you can slow down and give yourself even a little bit of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to feel what's going on and recognize, oh, I'm actually full, you will end up eating less overall. This is not about necessarily changing. This is not about cutting out food. This is not about, right? This isn't saying I'm only allowed to have this much. I'm not allowed to have those foods. I'm only allowed to have these foods. There are no rules. This is simply giving yourself a little bit more time, right? Can we pull back from the instant gratification of feeling the urge to eat and needing to get relief from that immediately by eating, and kind of sit in that and say, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to pay attention. The world is not going to end if I don't put more food on my plate in the next 5 minutes. I'm not going to die. You might feel like you're going to die. I get it. It might be dramatic, but in that moment, you feel like I have to eat. I have to have more food right now. Like I can't tolerate this. This is a skill. It is a challenging skill, but it is a life-changing skill. When you learn how to slow down and check in and notice and give yourself some time, you will eat less food overall, which will help you lose fat if that is a goal for you. If that is not a goal or something that you're not focusing on, you will still eat less food overall and not feel stuffed, right? Because very often we end up feeling stuffed after meals. I ate too much because I didn't give myself time. I didn't need that much, and I feel shitty. No one wants to feel shitty after a meal. You want to feel good. You want to have energy. You want to be able to go do whatever it is you need to do. You don't want to feel physically crappy, and then you also don't want to feel emotionally crappy, which also happens when you overeat. I did it again. Look at that. I have no self-control. All those stories. So very simply, by choosing a tool to help yourself slow down, you will feel better mentally because you won't overeat, and you will reduce the amount of food you are eating naturally without feeling deprived, without feeling restricted, because you haven't given yourself a rule, you haven't put any foods off limits, you haven't taken anything away. You have simply slowed down and allowed your body to do what it does, right? Our bodies are capable of telling us when we are full. Are there some people for whom noticing that is harder? Yes. I'm not telling you that this is the same for all people. People who have obesity, this is much, much harder. Biologically, genetically, there's a lot of factors there. That is where some of these weight loss drugs are coming in. I may do a separate episode about that. We are not all created equal. Some of us have to work much harder at this. There are skills for that, right? That's some of the somatic, some of the movement-based stuff actually that I talked about we're doing at the retreat separately. I might actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna do a whole episode about that. Yes, great idea. I'm gonna do an episode about that. But it is possible. And when you pair this skill, you couple it with some of the other skills, especially around protein, especially around volume of food with veggies, especially around fiber, it gets much easier, right? If you're only doing this and you're still eating a lot of more processed, less filling foods, it will be harder. It will absolutely be harder. So that is how that happens. You eat less overall because you slowed down and realized you didn't need to get more food. It's work. It's challenging. It can be done. And then it stays with you because once you learn these signals, they are with you. You learn these skills. They stay with you for life. You reconnect to your body in a new way. And there's so many positive. The ripple effect of that is kind of endless, to be honest. There's so many benefits. There's so much upside to that as it relates to all of this. Emotional eating, dealing with cravings, like not walking away from yourself, not constantly looking for that immediate relief. The moment you feel uncomfortable, the moment you get an urge to eat, wanting to get relief from that discomfort by eating, learning to deal with that applies to so many of these skills, right? Because we know, I know I need to eat more protein, I know I need to eat more veggies, I know I need to eat more fiber, but there's all these other urges, more emotional, more primal, more situational, environmental things that make it much harder. I know that. That is why we need these skills to help us navigate that. Because blindly following a rule, you're going to lose your willpower when you're tired, when you're sick, when you're stressed at the end of the day, and your kids are driving you nuts, and you've got a sick parent and work is nuts. You're not going to have the motivation or the discipline to stick to those rules. It's going to be out the door. That's not to say that always using these skills, I'm not saying they're a piece of cake, but when you practice them, they will get much easier. You have them to rely on and you know how to make choices. So that's what I wanted to share today. I hope this was helpful. I will talk more about this. Reach out if you've got questions, a DM, an email. You know where to find me. Contact info is in the show notes if you don't know where to find me. I'm on Instagram a lot, so DMs are a great way, or emails also too. I also have my cell phone number on my website. You can always text me. That is my personal phone number, my business phone number. They're one and the same. And I will see you next week.